Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's October 12th, 2019, and this is an episode of Ask Me Anything. There's a couple of questions that I want to try and address today. One is regarding which fruit, how we go about selecting the fruit from which we want to save the seeds and propagate those plants. Another question has to do with comfrey, where you can grow it. And another question is regarding transplanting tap-rooted trees. So I'll start off with Mars rover recently asked a question. I think it was in response to the San Marzano tomato seeds that we saved recently. And Mars asked, how do you go about selecting which seeds you're actually going to save? And that's a bit of a complicated answer that I can give, but my abbreviated answer is certainly we want to have, when it comes to our vegetable gardens, first thing we want to make sure that this is when it comes to tomatoes, this is a tomato or a pepper that we really enjoy. Is it relatively disease resistant? We're in zone 5A. Will it produce enough of the fruit, the vegetable that we actually want to have in the time constraints of our shorter growing season? Those are all really important components. When it comes to fruit trees or nut trees, we want to make sure that it grows in our zone. It's fruit that we actually love to consume. Is how easy, and then this goes with the tomatoes as well, how easy is it for us to process it? So those San Marzano tomatoes, they can be basically frozen real quickly. They have very little water content, and therefore when it comes to dehydrating, it's minimal time and expense dehydrating those particular tomatoes. The tomatoes are the right size, so they go through the food processor and slicing or dicing, whatever we want, and it gets done really rapidly. For canning, it really does a really good job for making various canned products that we make during the winter months. So, and that goes for each one of the plants that we have around. Now, when it comes to peppers, like in this area, bell peppers, with our cooler, damper seasons, they aren't as prolific as some of the other peppers, like the banana peppers that we can grow here. So so it's important then when I'm taking an heirloom seed that we're eliminating any competition or cross-pollination that can happen with that particular plant. I know I'm jumping around. This is how my mind thinks. So with bell peppers, we have limited quantities that we can actually get out of our gardens as a result that they really need that extra heat, where some of our banana peppers and other peppers don't need the heat. When it comes to the hot peppers, and we're becoming much more efficient or much more knowledgeable about the different types of hot peppers that we can grow. So some hot peppers, they have to be separated from other pepper plants by 100 feet in order to prevent cross-pollination. Other peppers need to be 800 feet or 1,000 feet from each other to decrease the likelihood of cross-pollinating, and therefore you're not going to get the same pepper that you're trying to save the seeds from. You're not going to reproduce that same pepper. And some pepper plants you can grow right next to each other in the same garden plot because they don't actually cross-pollinate. So you can have two different heirlooms in the same garden beds. And so it's doing the research ahead of time, trying to figure out which ones we can grow next to each other. Same thing with the different squash plants. Now I've been experimenting with our zephyr squash. Our zephyr squash, we can make a pseudo burger out of that squash easily. We love to eat them fresh and raw right out of the gardens as small little buggers. But when they start getting larger, we slice them into long pieces, and we do a whole variety. We do some baking products with them as well. But the problem with the zephyr is they're an F1 hybrid. They're not an heirloom. However, by chance, we had some of the seeds from some of the larger fruit that we weren't saving. I set in different locations, and the plants that produce look almost identical to the zephyr squash, and I've been growing those plants for the last couple of years, so I'm saving those seeds. They're delicious. They produce very much the same fruit as the zephyr squash. They're delicious as a small fruit that we get out of the plant, and they tend to breed so similar or almost identical. Now, we will get 1 or 2 plants that look a little bit bizarre, but if you put in 4 or 5 plants, you're almost guaranteed to have 2 plants that are going to have exactly what you want. When it comes to the plum trees around here, a lot of what I'll be doing in the future will be doing grafting. And I've learned a lot about the rootstock of the plants that we have around here. So we really want to have select rootstock, and we propagate the rootstock here as well, that we're going to go ahead and graft the type of fruit that we want on the surface, on the top of that rootstock. And I'll make more videos about that in the future. But if you find a good hardy rootstock that's really disease resistant, then I think it's really good to go ahead and propagate that. And I'm not doing that by seed typically, but I will be doing some rootstock by seed in the future. I think I covered most of those things. Like today, when it comes to selecting walnuts, I recently responded to, yesterday, the day before yesterday, I responded to a Craigslist listing that indicated that this person had some English walnuts. And I said, could you take a picture of under the tree so I could see what how many walnuts are there, because it's about a half-an-hour drive from where I am. And I said, could you take a picture of the tree? And I looked at the tree, and the trunk looked like that well-furrowed black walnut tree, and the leaves were really long with multiple leaflets and all. And I emailed him back. I said, that's a black walnut, but I think I'll come and get some of the nuts anyways, because one of the things that impressed me was this beautiful single tall trunk with a really balanced tree, and that really was very attractive to me. Now, when it comes to genetics and selecting the seed from these different trees, there is a genetic contribution to what you're going to ultimately get, but that also was pollinated, and I didn't see any other walnuts right around there. So I went and picked up those walnuts yesterday, and I used my walnut picker, and I may go back again today and get some more of those, even though it's a 30-minute drive, so it's an hour out of my day. But the nuts themselves, I just got done cleaning them, they don't look like black walnuts. I think it's actually a hybrid tree, so it's a cross. Now, will these seeds reproduce similar? Probably. It's a possibility. I don't know for certain. I haven't had that much experience with gathering walnuts and growing them and see how true they are to their original. But we do have some English Carpathian walnuts here on site, and butternuts that I can go ahead and graft onto these seeds, the trees, once they come up. So that's a possibility as well. But this tree really impressed me because of its look. Now, epigenetics and nutrigenomics, they really play a big role. And that has to do with the nutrients that are in the soil that are there, the wind conditions, the climate, all of those things. So I'm selecting a tree stock based on the trunk and conformation and the look of the nuts as well. And I cracked one nut open to look at it and see what I think about it. Well, it's a little bit tough to get at the flesh of the nut itself, but it tastes very sweet. So I think I'll gather some more of those nuts today. I hope this is enough just basic information. If you have more questions about how I'm selecting the plants, I'll try to incorporate that into the videos that I create in the future. Another question I got recently was regarding, can we grow comfrey in Minnesota or in Zone 3? And the type of comfrey that we've been growing here, which does not reproduce by seed, but it reproduces by root cuttings, will grow all the way up into zone 3. And I think you wouldn't have any trouble in Minnesota. This is a really hardy plant, this comfrey. I love it. The wildlife love it. Who eats the most of it? Well, the white-tailed deer, as they come through our food forest. That's really important. And one other thing I'll talk about is I probably won't be getting too many more dwarf trees because the maximum height that they get to, it just makes it too easy pickings for the white-tailed deer as they come through. And the dwarfs don't tend to be as vigorous and have the same amount of longevity as some of the other trees. Another question I got recently was regarding transplanting tap-rooted trees. Hold on just one second. Okay, so I thought it'd be best for me to move to a different location to help share the information about this next question. So Wayne recently wrote me an email indicating that he had 2 trees in his yard that he wants to move about 15 to 20 feet to a different location in his same front yard. So that doesn't sound too bad, but these are pretty good sized trees. So he enclosed a couple of photographs, one of which he's standing next to one of these live oak trees, next to both of the live oak trees. Now he's about 6 foot tall, so if you look at the photo, one tree's probably around 20 feet tall, the other one's about 24 feet tall. So that's a significant challenge whenever we're talking about moving any large tree. And I think maybe that this video, this email was in response to a video that I made last fall, transplanting this oak tree that's behind me. So this is the oak tree. I'm just over 6 foot, about 6'2" on a good day when I'm standing up straight. And this one I transplanted. This one really didn't grow in height at all, but it was getting established over this year. Now the property that we live on here is all gravel. Some areas are really bony, meaning big rocks as big as 4 feet in height. But there's places where there's a predominantly sand as well. So it depends on where we're digging up the tree and all. Now I just grabbed a small oak tree, and probably what I should say is when we're talking about tap-rooted trees, we're talking about our nut trees, our pine trees, and our oak trees. This I just grabbed out of the ground a couple of minutes ago, and it was a volunteer that came with a nut with the wood chip service that dropped off the nuts. So these were fresh wood chips that came off of a load last fall, and I took those wood chips and I put them as a barrier or like a path right next to one of our permanent raised beds. And this is one of the volunteer oak trees that came up through it. Now this has a long taproot on it, which is the same height as as the part that you can see above the ground. Now the reason that it's so tortuous is because this was growing in fresh wood chips. So as a result, there's big chunks, and so this taproot had to make its way around. If this was in sandy soil, this taproot would be straight down just like the upper part of it. But the important thing to see is, even with this young tree that's only 1 year old now, you see lots of lateral branching going off to the sides, and you can see that it actually splits the taproot itself. So when we're transplanting a relatively young taprooted tree, it's not just important to try and save as much of that taproot as possible. It's also important trying to look at just below the surface of the soil. So this fall I'm going to be transplanting a whole bunch of different trees, some of which are walnut trees, which have a taproot as well, and many of which are different fruit and other nut trees around here on the property. So that I'll be making quite a few videos, and I'll try and talk about how I'm going about trying to transplant these trees. If they're a good sized tree at all, then what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to use Bumblebee, the mini excavator, which I used to transplant this tree last fall. So my goal last fall was, since this was in a wooded area that didn't have the duff on it, so in other words, I had been working through the wooded area and pulling out lots of dead trees. We got lots of dead ash trees in this area from the emerald ash boring insect killing the trees. So I was going through the area, taking down as many of those ash trees as I could, and as a result, the humus layer, the duff, the force, that part that isn't soil, but it sits on the surface of the soil in wood lots and in food forests and forest areas, that's a very important layer. And that's an aerobic area above the soil that the trees in a forest are very dependent on. When we look at trees, even when we're looking at taprooted trees, it's that first 12 to 18 inches of the soil surface, including the duff or the humus that sits on the surface of it, and that's the small limbs and leaves that are breaking down and falling on the ground. As the animals go through the forest, they're putting different nitrogenous and fecal waste on the surface of the soil as well. So all of that vegetative material that's breaking down, and the fungi are decomposing that, and eventually that's going to be incorporated into the surface of the soil. But all that information, all of that nutrient-dense material is providing rich nutrients that the trees really depend on. So it isn't just the taproot that we're worried about when we're transplanting seeds. We really have to pay attention to the soil, the area around the base of the tree. So many people will say, when we look at some of those large trees that you may see in the background there, that the drip edge or the width of the canopy of the tree, the root mass is about the same. I think that's a great deal of misinformation. There's a lot of published articles talking about how extensive the root networks actually are. And those areas directly below the tree that people are mulching, that are just at the drip edge of the canopy above it, they're probably missing the ability to feed the humus or provide more humus or duff layer, which really increases the nutrients to the tree itself, because they're not getting out to those distal, those really lateral or horizontal root systems that go beyond the canopy of the tree. So when you see me transplanting trees, you see nowadays I always transplant them into a mound, and then when I'm doing mulching, and you may be able to see this whole area around here is all mulched, and I really do companion planting all around the trees that I plant. So I want to have various different bushes and shrubs and herbaceous layers that actually can, when their leaves are given off, and they may be dynamic accumulators, accumulating nutrients from not necessarily the depths of a taproot, but accumulating nutrients from the microbes that are in the vicinity, and they're going to drop their nutrients as well. Now I'm getting off onto a sidetrack. Sorry, Wayne. So, can we transplant larger trees? Yes, I've done it. My mini excavator, which is about a 3-ton mini excavator, I wouldn't try and tackle your trees with a piece of equipment my size. Now, there are professional tree services that have tree spades, and they're like big blades, if it's not really bony ground, that can slice down into the surface of the soil and make like a cone-shaped area and pick up a great deal of intact root system without disturbing the soil and the network that's supporting the microbes that are supporting that tree. There's actually a good video online. If I can, I'll either link it below, or I'll try and incorporate a little bit of the footage in this video, where they took a 100-year-old oak tree using very large bulldozers and excavators to go ahead and excavate around the base of this tree, build a root containing structure on an angle to go ahead and keep as much of that soil intact as possible, and then move this massive system to a different spot on the property that was previously excavated, set it down in there and move it. Now, that I'm sure that costs a lot of money to move that tree, and that's where we get into trouble. If you don't have the financial resources to move these large trees, then you have some risks. And now there's some trees way in the background over there that you could see, and I'll do some talks about some of the drawbacks of doing the hugelkultur pit systems that I've been doing. So hugelkultur is earth-covered wood. So one of the things we ended up doing here was we did lots of different hugelkultur beds around the property. And the thing that I found that works the absolute best here is, instead of, when you're clearing an area of property and you've got lots of dead trees and all that, we ended up digging up the root balls, breaking up the trunks and all the limbs, digging huge pits, putting all of that organic material, all that carbon source, sequestering carbon, and covering it up with earth. So we did this in multiple places. This whole area in our second food forest, and I'll be showing more videos soon of the area that I'm working on now, where we're having a combination of food forests with hedgerows or living edges, along with permanent raised beds as well, as we got some more wood chips in. So one of the challenges is that when I put these hugelkultur pits in, for the first 3 years, I kept going over it and filling in any sunken areas where there was voids between some of the limbs. Some of the soil would come down, and each spring moisture would go, and as a result of the frost, things would heave and the material would go down. Then after 3 years, we dug our swale systems in, put our ponds in, put some underground piping in as well. I've learned a lot through this whole process, and now we're probably 12 or 13 years later. There are some small sunken areas where the wood has been decomposing as well, and therefore I have to change my approach for my permanent raised beds, and I'll be talking more about that in an upcoming video. But these hugelkultur pits, when we dug those down, we were in a really densely wooded area with many dead trees, stone walls, debris in the area. So we dug these big pits, filled them in with all this material and all. But when we dug the big pits, sometimes when you're digging out a tree, those trees, it's obvious that those two trunks of trees that are right next to each other, you're worried about this tree falling down and damaging the tree that's really good, and you're digging out that root ball from that tree. Well, it's obvious that you're damaging some of the roots from that tree. Well, in actuality, because of this, in a forested area, even though there's dead trees there's a fine meshwork that goes well beyond the canopy of the tree, and it's dependent on all of the other trees that are surrounding the area, even if it's not the same species. So there's this dynamic interaction in a forest or a wood lot where all of these trees are exchanging nutrients through the microbial communities, including fungal networks that are exchanging nutrients. And as a result of, when I went to transplant some trees, because these trees were just all bunched together, and there are 3 good looking trees. One is a willow and 2 maples, and I moved one of the maples, and we used a intermediate sized excavator to do that. So my friend has one that's probably around, I'm thinking 10 or 12 ton excavator, and we use that piece of equipment to dig up that tree, which was right next to 2 other trees, and they were just too close together, so I moved it further away. Well, the top of that tree has died, but the rest of the tree seems to be doing well. Now, ideally, I would have pruned that right off the bat, but I didn't. We had so much going on, so I don't know how well that tree will do over the years to come. But the point that I want to make is that when we're disrupting the soil, first we're disrupting the duff if you're doing clearing like we are. But in Wayne's case, it looks like he's got lawn surfacers. So but there is an interaction between those two trees, those two oak trees that are next to each other. So I think that they could successfully be moved, but it need larger pieces of equipment than what I have. And mine is a mini excavator, Bumblebee, that you've seen in videos that we've used. But yes, that size tree can be moved either using a professional tree service or excavators, heavy equipment operators that you know who have had experience transplanting trees. Because there is a learning curve to transplanting trees. So this has been a bit long-winded. I'm sorry for this being so long, but I wanted to share those thoughts and get back to you regarding these comments and questions that I've gotten. So if you found this video of value, please give us a thumbs up. If you have comments or questions, please leave them below. I really appreciate it. And I really do appreciate everyone's reaching out and the communication, the interactions on this channel. Thanks so much for watching, folks, and have a great day. Bye-bye now.